Time right now is 11:06 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. Time now to Ask the Rabbi right here on WPSL. A very pleasant good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you, and welcome to Ask a Rabbi. And so I was going to talk about the Ten Commandments today, but I confess I forgot to bring my scriptures with me, and without the Hebrew, I don't know that I'm really willing to go into a lot of detail without being able to double check some things. But I can talk about them a little bit in general. One of the things to note about the Ten Commandments, there are two versions of them in scriptures, one in the book of Exodus when they're originally given, and then there's what is considered Moses' recap with some slight differences, not anything overly significant, but a recap in the book of Deuteronomy. And so why are there 10? Well, that's the number people came up with. Mel Brooks notwithstanding, the 15 commandments coming out of the mountain. Yes, that's one of my favorite scenes out of the movie. And I recently learned that that was actually an afterthought that he had. He needed a bridge to go between the early part and Rome. And so he's stuck in this little piece, and that's part of why it's him coming down with it and doing that little vignette. Yeah, and it's one of the funniest pieces.
He's an amazing guy. He was always involved in the Dodger Old Timers games and the Hollywood Stars games. What a nutcase. He's great.
He really is. So, and we actually just recently watched that at my synagogue. We have what we call Movies in a Nosh once a month, where members come in, and we typically have a little bit to eat and do that. So that was the movie that the group wanted this month. So it's fresh in my mind, the craziness of that movie. So 10 Commandments. Actually, in Hebrew, they're not called the 10 Commandments. They're called the 10 Utterances, which is one of the interesting, to me, differences. There are a couple of other distinctions between what Jews call the Ten Commandments and what Christians call the Ten Commandments. They're basically the same text, but they're broken up a little bit differently. So, for example, the first one Jewishly is, know that I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Okay, and so there's not really any instruction in that other than I am, right? It starts out Anochi, I am. It's the old form of I am. I am Adonai, your God. So let me actually use that as a stepping stone to go over to a very different place, which is to talk about God's name. That's one of the other popular topics. Because sometimes people, especially in my classes, will come up to me and say, oh, it's Jehovah, it's Yahweh, it's something like that. Those are not God's names. God's name is Yud-He Vav-He. So it's four letters.
Whoa, back up. What?
God's name is Yud-He Vav-He.
Yud-He.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Va.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you've got to do that without any vowels, because there's no vowels in God's name. So you're now as you sit there and try to sound that out. Right. So where does Jehovah come from? It's taking the vowels from Adonai or Elohim, which are the two places where they grab the vowels, and overlaying them onto the consonants of God's name.
Interesting.
Yeah,
wow.
It really is. And so it's not that and I ask this of my classes, do you think a people would ever forget how to pronounce God's name? Does that make any sense? That doesn't begin to make sense. Who's going to forget it? Even if you only say it once in your life, you're going to remember it. And so the bottom line is really not that it was forgotten, but rather that God's name is ineffable. And to try to explain that to the Romans, that would not have gone easily. Try to explain, we've got one God, and that God has a name, but we can't tell it to you because it can't be pronounced. Right? It's hard enough to believe that they could forget it, but it's even harder, I think, to try to explain what I just said, which is that it's these consonants that have no tone to them And, it's the combination of those that are God's name. And so what most people come up with is that it's really a breath. It's really just a breath.
Okay.
And
That
if
makes
you think
sense.
about it,
Yeah.
it does make sense, right? Because what is it that God does? God breathes us into life. And what is it that separates life from death is breath, right? And neshima, which is breath in Hebrew, is very, very close to neshama, which is soul. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. So it's one of the names for soul, one of the levels of soul. And so a breath is, and that is many times how you connect to God, right? Or by something that takes your breath away, right? Those breathless moments of being. And so I think that's part of it. The other piece that's interesting about God's four-letter name is that it is the verb to be. But it is past tense, present tense, and future tense folded into a really strange form. And so you might say that it's more like isness. Right? And perhaps that's where the name eternal comes from. Is, was, and will be.
Mm-hmm.
As in God always has been, God always will be, and God certainly is present in the moment to be experienced. And so there's this wonderful, all of these pieces are caught up into this four-letter name. And it is a very holy name. Now, I've watched over the course of my life some interesting pieces about that because a lot of people don't know much about it, and people who don't read Hebrew, when they finally learn the alphabet, they try to sound it out. Of course, we don't sound out God's name because what are you going to do with no vowels? And so people struggle with it, and or they're reading in a book, like the book that I normally bring in of the Tanakh, of the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
They'll pick that up, and it'll have the vowels from Adonai or Elohim overlaid onto the Yud He Vav He. Not because you're supposed to use them to pronounce it, but so that you know when you're supposed to say Adonai and when you're supposed to say Elohim. So that's kind of coded into the vowels, and those who are used to reading it can spot it quickly and know what the text is usually read as in that context. And Hebrew is a very contextual language, even more so than English. English is quite a bit, right? Because we know if it's read or read or
Sure.
to address something or an address. Like I can't resist that one after Ask a Lawyer. And right. But we know,
Especially the last
right,
show.
after the last show. So English is a contextual language, but Hebrew is like contextual cubed. It's really, really contextual. And because of that, you very often can have 2 or 3 different meanings. And so it's a good idea to know whether God is called upon as the mighty one, which is what Elohim is, or Adonai, which is a really interesting name for God. Because the word Adonai comes not from Lord, which is how it's been commonly translated now, but from the sockets with which the portable sanctuary was put together. It had kind of like an erector set construction. And again, I wish I could flip to that and read it in the text right now, but I can't do that. But they had silver rods that went into silver fittings, and so they would build a platform and the walls, and they would build the structure of the portable synagogue. And by doing that, they used rods and Adonim. So Adonai is my sockets. Right, which is kind of an interesting idea, So what is God? But perhaps I plug my phone into its socket, right? And with that, I can charge my phone. So I like to think that when you need to or when you want to, you can plug into that sense of the divine, that reality that extends beyond our minds and our comprehension to the great. Some people call it the great mystery, whatever it is that God really is. Maimonides said the only thing we can know about God is that God is beyond comprehension. Love philosophers when they do things like that, right? The only thing you can know is that you can't know it. And
Yes.
right. And so, but people have pondered it. People have sought God. And I've said that in other shows that that to me, Judaism is God seeking. That's the idea of it, wrestling with God and the concept of God and seeking. And I'll go back into why I say that because I see the look on your face. And so we have this idea of plugging in and rejuvenating, revitalizing ourselves and being able to do that. And different people do it different ways. And there's any number of different traditions that have grown up within every faith tradition. Within Judaism, there are meditative processes, there are prayers, there are just any number of different ways that people seek to reconnect with God. And that's what Judaism teaches. Judaism teaches that God never left. God is ever waiting and always ready. We're the ones who turn away. We're the ones who become obsessed with the SUVs, the phone, the pretty clothes, the whatever, right? Whatever it is that
materialism,
or the materialist things, or even other people, and ignore God as we deal with other people. But every once in a while, all of us need to just sit back and reconnect, rejuvenate, however that works for you. And so it's different ways for different people. And I think that that's the idea of calling God Adonai, is that we're asking for that socket, that connection. And which brings up another interesting point of language. The Hebrew language, to me, opens up so much of what is going on. We call a gentleman, so Adoni, I would say to you, right? Now, at one level, that's sir, right? Or my lord, or, any of those kinds of terms. And interestingly, we don't use the feminine of that to talk to a woman. We'd call we say geveret, a feminine of strength, which is really interesting. That's another whole discussion.
Feminine of strength. I like
right.
that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So
Jewish women seem to be stronger. I mean, there's
Okay, so I think that anytime that you're a minority in a culture, you learn to be stronger if you're going to maintain that identity.
Okay.
I think that's just part of any minority identity, that if you're gonna just blend in, then you don't have to worry about being strong or being faithful to who and what you are. But if you're going to maintain an identity that isn't the majority, that takes a little bit of determination, a little bit of strength of character to do that. Not that other people don't have strength of character, they do, but it's not required for the sake of maintaining the identity. But I think any minority identity is faced with that. So, getting back to my socket, I think that that's a way of saying that every human being can help us find God or not. Right? Everybody can be that connection, or perhaps not. And so there are different ways of connecting with God. So that's part of where I think the term Adonai comes from, is from those sockets. And other names for God include Shaddai, which is Almighty. And inside there's a little pun of mountains and breasts and, right, the Grand Tetons. With all of that they carry, mountains have always been seen in that kind of imagery. It evokes it for some people. And so El Shaddai, God Almighty, that's the name of God that is put on the mezuzah, the parchment that's attached to the doorpost, is that name, the shin of it. And people have seen in it, Shomer Daltot Yisrael, the guardian of the houses of Israel. And some people get superstitious and think that, it's a good luck charm. It's not. It's a reminder of what it is to be godly, both inside and outside of that portal. Because as we transition different things, then we are invited to remember that the ways that we are godly changes depending on where we're at a given time. Right? The ways that we're godly in our home is not the way we should be godly in the marketplace or even in our front yards. And so the Hebrew instruction in Deuteronomy is put this on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, because those are the places where you transition. And in touching it for just a moment, you're reminding yourself that speaking of God and being mindful of God is different in each of those locations. And over time, now psychologists will tell you, you don't take your problems from the house out into the marketplace, and you don't take the problems from the marketplace into the home, or one of them is going to give out. And so that, I think, is a key piece. And that's the function of that scripture that says, put it on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So, anybody want to call in with a question for Ask the Rabbi? It is 772
340-1590.
Thank you. Got you there. Okay.
There you go.
And there we
the
go.
Phones are working.
340-1590 on WPSL Digital 1590. Please do join me. Please join me with a question if you have one. And I think let's take one moment, if you would, and let's tell people about Congregation Eitz Chayim.
You're going to have to do it live.
I'm going to have to do it live.
You're gonna
Okay.
have to do it
so,
live.
folks, we're faced today with, we don't have all the little mechanical assists. It's wonderful when people go on vacation, but we can manage it. So I will tell you a little bit about Congregation Eitz Chayim, where I am the rabbi. I'm lucky enough to be that rabbi. We are a reform with a renewal flair. What does that mean? Well, mostly our practice is reform, and we do lots of music and lots of joyful things and a sense of community. We're multi-generational. We go all the way from very little to very senior, so we've got the full range, and I think that's really healthy. We do Friday night services at 7:30 p.m. on Fridays. And we do Shabbat morning. We do Stolen Moments at 9:30 a.m., followed by Shabbat morning services at 10:30. So please do join us. We're at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. It's the blue building across from Met Stadium. We're in the center of that front building, Suite 102. Please join us there anytime for services or any of our other activities. You can find us on Facebook or on the net.
Now, you've talked about the stolen moments. What is that exactly?
That is Torah study.
Okay.
We study the weekly Torah portion. Jewishly, the first 5 books are divided up into portions. There's 54 of them because depending on the year, you might have 54 weeks. Because it's a lunar calendar intercalated into a solar calendar. And so what that means is that there are about 360 days, 354 to 360 days in a calendar, because it's 12 lunar cycles.
Okay, yeah.
And as you can tell, that slips compared to the solar cycle. And so every so often, an entire month is added, because you can't add a half of a phase of the moon. You have to add the moon in whole increments. And so some years have 13 months. Most years have 12. But even the Gregorian calendar slips, right? More than a day.
Sure.
Right. People think that every 4 years is a leap year, but it's not. It's a little more complicated than that. It's any year divisible by 4 unless it's divisible by 100, but it is again when it's 400. So really the Gregorian calendar is a little more complicated. Most people don't worry about it. Most of us aren't going to live long enough for it to be a major issue. But
you're not going to live to 400?
It's doubtful. Doubtful.
Slightly.
Yeah. We just lost the oldest person on Earth at 117. Just died. So there are people who are living to a good old age. What I really hope mostly for myself is that I'm fully mobile and functional for whatever years I'm given. And so that one I'm going to turn down and go back to being live. You're supposed to call into WPSL Digital 1590 at 772-340-1590. 340-1590. Please feel free to call in, and I will be glad to answer any questions that you might have. So, yeah, we say to people that you should live to be 120, but whatever years I'm given, may they be productive ones, and may I feel good about it.
There you go.
In many different ways. And I wish that for everybody, that whatever years they have. So we're not going to worry about that one, but let's talk about some of the other things that we've raised here, some other questions. And I think it's significant to talk about some of the differences in the Ten Commandments. I mentioned the first one, that Jewishly, the first one is simply a statement of God's existence. And there's no commandment there. But at the end of the last session last week, you mentioned something about who finds out, who knows when you violate one of the Ten Commandments. And so I'll talk just in general about it, and then next week we'll go into more detail. The things that are mentioned in the Ten Commandments, or the 10 utterances as we call them in Judaism, are things that are secret. Nobody's going to know if you covet something, if you're jealous about something. It's going to show in your behavior. It's going to destroy your relationship with your neighbor. But the reason for it is very often hidden and masked. People are very reluctant to share the real reasons why they feel and have certain senses. So before I go on with that, let's talk to Barry on line 1.
Barry, you're up.
Hey, good morning. My question is simple. Would you please explain the difference between Orthodox Judaism and Reform Judaism?
Absolutely. So the question was, what's the difference between Orthodox and Reform? And there's actually 2 other main branches, which are Conservative and Reconstructionist. So I will start out.
I've never even heard those before.
Oh, those are all around. They're even in Tucson, from our old stomping grounds.
Okay.
And most communities will have larger communities, not a small community like the Treasure Coast, but a larger community, such as if you go down to West Palm or anywhere where there's a number of synagogues. There are likely to be Orthodox ones, conservative ones, Reform, and Reconstructionist. So basically it's a difference in how ritual is observed and how stringent certain requirements are considered. So the Orthodox have a super stringent view of things, and they're very much guided by something called halakha, which is usually translated as law, but it really means the way or the pathway, the guidelines. And so, one of my jokes is when I look at those things that say, what are they 10? There was somebody had a marquee on a church, and it said, what are they 10 guidelines? And I said, yeah, they are. That's really what the word is. Because, again, it's a secret thing. So back to what is Orthodox, what is Reform. Reform is much more liberal, much more open, and takes more of a view that we are living in a very modern society, and so we do things with that in mind. We use electricity, so we'll use microphone, we stream, we do a lot of things like that help make it easier for the community to be part of it. We're not stringent on dietary laws. In our synagogue, we don't allow pork or shellfish, but we're not as stringent about whether or not something actually has a kosher certification on it. We're more inclined to read the ingredients and make sure that they're okay. So that it's that kind of thing. Interestingly, it's a Friday night service. Being the strong service is a Reform kind of thing for the most part. And you have to temper everything in Judaism with some do, some don't, because no two people do any flavor of Judaism the same way. But that's okay. You come to where it's predominantly combined. And so the Orthodox service will tend to be almost exclusively in Hebrew. Prayer books will have a translation of English, but you're on your own to read them. In a Reform congregation, much more English, much less Hebrew in the service. At one time, there was almost nothing. Now we do quite a bit in our congregation because we have that renewal piece. We do tend to do a lot of singing, and the singing tends to be Hebrew, although some of the singing is also English. So it has to do with how the service is conducted and the stringency of different observances. So the history back in Europe, way back when, a few hundred years ago, there were not different flavors of Judaism. There was just Judaism. And then Reform actually started as progressive in Europe. And what they really wanted, they wanted the sermon not to be in Yiddish or in Hebrew. They wanted the sermon to be in German. So it started out as a liturgy change. And when those Europeans came to the U.S., they brought that idea of how services should be conducted, and under the leadership of a couple of different people, Rabbis Wise, Rabbi Silver, a couple of different ones, got together and formed what was then the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which was the Reform movement. And their first prayer book, the only thing it had in Hebrew was the Shema. It was mostly in English. And over time, they've come back to much, much more Hebrew. The most recent Mishkan Tefillah prayer book out of the Reform movement has enough Hebrew in it that you could actually do a conservative service. So Reform starts, and that's around the late 1800s, 1900s. It's the newfangled thing, Reform. And they start out doing the things that a movement does. They put together a school to train rabbis, and those kinds of things go on. And they also start their prayer books and organizing. So that's Reform. There's a famous dinner that caused a rift between the folks who were very Reform or Reforming, might be another way of looking at it because it's an active word. They just changed the name not that long ago from the UAHC to the URJ, the Reform Jewish movement. And but in that, what's called the famous banquet dispute, where there was shrimp on the menu, it never was served, and there's a lot of questions as to how it was on the menu, whether that was a catering mistake or an intentional mistake or what the deal was. But in any event, it ended up splitting off a group that said, you've just gone too far. We need to be more observant, more ritualistically, and no, we're not going to break for news. So, and they stepped back and they formed the conservative movement. And then, oddly enough, Orthodox started to say, well, this is how we're going to do it, and started to form their various groups. And there's a number of different Orthodox. There's modern Orthodox. There's Satmar. There's a whole different sets of Orthodox congregations. And then splitting off of conservative was under the leadership of Kaplan, Rabbi Kaplan, came Reconstructionist, to reconstruct Judaism in a more packaged to then modern America. And he published a book, Judaism as a Civilization, and it had slightly changed some of the liturgy, the language in it. That's usually what causes the movement changes, is liturgy. So those are mostly what the differences are. I don't know if I answered your question, Barry, or if I went far afield on you there.
I think Barry is gone.
Barry is gone. Okay, so hopefully you heard the answer as you listened in. And so that's a real quick history of the different movements. And when I say with a renewal flair, renewal is not a movement per se, because it doesn't have a lot of the pieces that a movement would have. And congregations such as ours, we're one of a number of congregations that are dual affiliated. And being part of renewal that's a grassroots movement to really enhance the spirituality within Judaism, the joy, the singing, and to bring it that way. But it's a reaching into the roots of Judaism and pulling that tree, if you will, out into modern life in a way that both honors the past and is vibrant. And so it's a paradigm shift, if you will, for Judaism, but looking at it from a scholarly, rooted in the text kind of way.
If you go to Israel,
Mm-hmm.
is that, do you find more Orthodox than Reformed?
Yeah, there's more Orthodox than there are Reform, but the majority of Israelis are secular. So the Reform is a very small group, even there. Here it only makes up between 10 and 12% of American Jews.
Right. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Orthodox is by far not the largest movement. The largest movement in the U.S. is the Reform movement, which is over 40% of all Jews. It's the largest group. And followed next by conservative, then Reconstructionist, and then Orthodox, and then you've got about 18% that are other, whatever. So there's a humanist group inside Judaism, and they
a what?
A humanist,
Humanist.
Jewish humanist, right? So they
Really?
yeah, they don't pray to God, but they love to sing the songs and do the other parts of Judaism. And so it's the human experience that they're into celebrating. So it's a wide variety. You know, when I say that,
So now wait a minute. Are they atheists?
some of them, some of them.
Wow.
You can be an atheist and be Jewish. Judaism doesn't say you have to. There's no requirement to believe in anything. But if you do believe and worship a God, it needs to be the one, the Creator God. So it's not so much that you can't do that. And so Marion is asking here on my phone, is modern Orthodoxy, are men and women still seated separately? And the answer is it depends on the congregation. In most of them, yes. A couple of them are egalitarian, which is an interesting branching even within the modern Orthodox. So you're going to see some different things. And in those forms of Judaism, the separation of men and women is as much as it is in any group that separates men and women. It's an attempt to help people concentrate on the task at hand, namely prayer. And, I would agree with those who say that today, in some ways, that makes it actually harder to concentrate, to not have your family and your loved ones next to you, but to be separated. So Marion, yes, in some congregations, yes, and some no. Sometimes, the old days, like when I used to visit my grandmother in Brooklyn, and I would go with her to services, we went upstairs and davened behind the mechitza, behind the curtain, not a curtain, but like a trellis kind of thing that you could look through. And I have very fond memories of sitting with her doing that. And hi to my cousin who probably also remembers going with Bubby to and davening. And those are some of my fondest memories, not necessarily the being upstairs and separated. More modern Orthodox congregations are going to be on the same level, but perhaps with a glass enclosure. And I've been in a number of those where they can see each other, but it is still a separation. And some parts of the service are male only as far as who does what rituals. So that's the other part. Although Talmud says that a woman can read Torah. There's no reason not to, except possibly that it would embarrass a community. And I would say that the more advanced, more modern Orthodox are starting to counter that. We're seeing female rabbis now in the Orthodox communities. It's the last one to actually come over and start to do that. Hi. And so what they're now acknowledging is that women are, in fact, knowledgeable and scholarly on the kinds of things that would go with somebody who could read and interpret Torah for you.
Maybe
So,
the Catholic Church will. While we have rabbis, why not priests? Oh.
Well, there is inside the Catholic movement, right, the extraordinary movement that does have, right, the American Catholic does have women clergy. So it's starting. It takes a while to work its way into the more entrenched, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Rome?
Even Rome has changed. The Pope no longer rides a donkey. Right? He does take a car and he does fly. So things do change. They just don't change as quickly. And that's true.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. That's true of all Orthodox every Orthodox movement in every religion will tell you they've never changed. They do it the same old way that, it's always been.
So do the Orthodox churches...
synagogues or churches?
No, churches.
Okay.
Like the Eastern and
Eastern
Greek
Orthodox,
and
yeah.
Do women play a key role in those churches, or are they kind of like the Catholics?
They're a little bit more like the Catholics, but it changes. It's varying. Everybody's experiencing changes in the world right now, and we've actually gone through historically a number of shifts from where women had bigger roles and to where they have lesser roles. Right? In the U.S., we actually tamped down women at the end of World War II, partially to create jobs for returning vets. Wanted to get the women out of the workforce and, stuff them in the home. Plus, Madison Avenue discovered that you could sell more Legos if you sell a boy set and a girl set rather than just a set. If you look at advertisements for Legos in the early 50s, you're going to see boys and girls standing around a table building Legos, and they're doing it together, and they're all building buildings and doing the kinds of things that that I grew up thinking Legos were used for. I confess I used American brick, but it was the same idea. I love to build things, and I think a lot of kids do. After that, they started to genderize things because merchants have discovered they can sell about 40% more by highly genderizing the products. We all know it. If you look at a razor, a pink one and a blue one, that they look the same. They function the same. It's got the same metal, the same plastic. It's just a different color. And so you pay extra for that pink one. It's called the pink tax. And but that's a marketing deal. A lot of gender is marketing, and it's arbitrary. It's not real. If you look back even just 100 years ago, you're going to find, interestingly, pink is a male color because it's a diminutive of red, and therefore too strong for the gentler sex. And so women should be clothed in gentle colors like blues.
Okay.
And it's not until sometime after that marketing moves it to the colors we have now, right? Where, if the baby drinks out of the wrong colored cup, they're going to be confused. No, they're not. It's a color, and some people are colorblind, so it's not going to matter at all anyway. But in reality, it doesn't make a big difference. And, little boys used to wear dresses because it was a whole lot easier before those wonderful inventions called snaps to get in and change a young boy's diapers until they were potty trained. So, plus you outgrow a dress more slowly than you do pants.
And the Scottish guys still wear.
The Scottish guys still do. And
kilts.
Right. So they also do in Somalia, right? The lava.
There you go. Do you want to take a break? You've been talking. So we finally got our. The station is back.
The station is back. Yay for internet. Okay, let's do that then. We'll take a commercial break here.
Let's talk
here we
about
go.
the temple here.
Congregation Eitz Chayim, your welcoming, inclusive, spiritual, and joyful Jewish home in Port St. Lucie. We welcome you to renew your inner Jew and join us. We are Reform Jewish with a renewal flair. We are multi-generational. We are welcoming to all. Come join us for a Friday night at 7:30 p.m. for our Kabbalat Shabbat services, or Stolen Moments on Saturday morning, where we discuss the Parsha of the week at 9:30 a.m. Shabbat morning services follow Stolen Moments, usually at around 10:30 a.m. Our address is 540 Northwest University, across from Met Stadium, and we are in Suite 102. Again, that's 540 Northwest University, Suite 102. Please join us for Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. or Shabbat morning starting at 9:30 a.m. for Stolen Moments. Congregation Eitz Chayim.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
Hey, you can ask the rabbi, 340-1590, 340-1590.
And I would love to answer any questions that anybody has. So I appreciate them all. Thank you for joining me, and welcome back. And thank you to all the folks who are watching us live. And please know that it also will be archived on YouTube, and so you'll be able to watch the whole show. Those are all great things. And this is as good a time as any to mention that we're starting to ramp up, as most congregations are, for the High Holy Day services. They're in early September this year. They're always the same time on the Jewish calendar. They're always the 1st and 10th days of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. But if you're going to be joining us, please, the website will be functional to make a reservation there. And it's open to everyone in the community. Please do make a reservation, though, so that we know to have a name tag for you and a prayer book so that you can be part of the community for us. And
So is this a situation where a lot of people just show up for the High Holy Days and not the rest of the year?
We have what we call 2 and 3 day Jews, and
Yes.
just as the Christians
I was
have.
going to say the same thing.
Right. In Christianity, they're called Creasters, and we call them the 3 day Jews. And let me look up the specific date here. Like I said, it's always the 1st of Tishrei, and so it starts the evening of the 9th, and day services are on the 10th of September. That's Rosh Hashanah. So those evening services start at 7, and then the morning service schedule will be online, and we'll have kids services as well. We'll also do Tashlich and a couple of other things. We do second day on the 11th, and then Yom Kippur is on the 19th. So please join us for that. And you're welcome to join us for any parts of that.
Bar and bas mitzvahs.
Bar and bat, yeah.
Is that 16, 15?
13.
13.
13,
Okay.
12 to 13, somewhere
Okay.
in that range.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you obviously catch it right when the boys' voices are cracking and they're going through puberty.
and they're
and
they're reading.
Right. Yeah, it's the fun part. And one of my more humorous moments was in Tucson. I sometimes talk about Tucson. We had a musical director there who was amazing, and I truly miss having her. We've got Reverend Jack who plays music for us, and he's fantastic. Maya was fantastic in a different way, and we had a young man whose voice was really, really cracking. And I can remember Maya saying to the choir, "Now we have to sing really loud because his voice is cracking."
Yes.
And of course, by the time we finished studying and we actually got to the bar mitzvah, his voice was this nice, beautiful, deep male voice. And it was just the change that was happening. And one time when I rehearsed with the choir and he couldn't be there, so I pretended to be him. And I've got both a soprano register. Thank you, Maya, for teaching me to sing soprano. And I've also got my normal deep bass register. And so I used that one to imitate him. And a couple of the people in the choir looked at me and said, "Shavir, what happened to your voice?" So it just got really deep for a little bit.
So now, how large was your congregation in Tucson?
It was about 100 families. So
Okay. That's pretty large.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a reasonable size, and we're not quite that big yet at Congregation Eitz Chayim, but we're just now coming up on being 3 years old. We're actually 3 years old from being a chavurah, and we started in.
Okay, now what's that?
The chavurah is not a congregation. What Eitz Chayim started out was just a Saturday night once a month and a Sunday night once a month, just a gathering for some music and a shared meal. Sunday nights were usually training, and we invited somebody in who gave some instructional program.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did the meal and maybe a little singing around it. And Saturday, we did something called Havdalah, which is the end of the Shabbat. So it was a meal, the end of Shabbat, and then what's called Malav Amalka, which is a very rejoicing kind of escorting the queen leaving for Shabbat. So we used to do that. We do each of those once a month. And we were growing, and then when my contract was terminated at the other place, the group in the Chavarah looked at me and said, well, let's do a synagogue. And my first reaction was actually, we need to sit back and make sure we can do this. So we took a week to really look at it, and then we launched, and we were able to have High Holy Day services, which that year we held in the town hall in Tradition. And we had over 100 people at our first High Holiday service. But of course, those are not what you would call real full members. We call them members, and we consider them members, and we hope that they'll stay. But we also know that the ones that are only going to come for the High Holidays.
3-day Jews.
3-day Jews, right. So, and you're not going to please everybody, ever, with anything that you do. And we're much more musical, and we're a modern musical, so it's not the old style melodies. And so that's part of the changes. All right. Well, we have a question from Neil.
Neil, you're up. Go ahead, Neil.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You're on with the rabbi. Go.
Thank you so much for the show. Great show. I'm not in this area, but I tuned in and I love it. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
The question is, what would the term salvation mean in the Jewish mindset? It's something that we as Christians, we see that message taught to the Jews, but they're already saved. In terms of they are Jewish, they are part of Abraham's family. So what would that concept mean to them? And I can take that answer off the air. I can listen to you on the radio.
Okay, so the question was, what is salvation to Jews? Because Jews, as Neil pointed out, are part of the Abrahamic tradition and never left. Right? Never left God. I always invite people to come into our services, and if you have any question whether or not God is present, I don't think you will. You'll see a joyous connection with God going on in the course of the service. Different people experiencing different levels, of course, because everybody's where they are. And so what is salvation? Right? God save us. Well, Judaism doesn't teach a heaven and hell kind of concept. That's actually foreign. Christianity gets that more from Zoroastrianism. Oh, what's Zoroastrianism? I hear you
Wait a
say.
minute. Zorro's a television show.
No, not Zorro,
okay.
but it's a Persian religion taught by Zarathustra or Zoroaster. That's his Greek name. Zoroaster is the Greek. Zarathustra, who taught about one God, and he taught about heaven and hell. And it kind of made sense to Rome, as Christianity moved into Rome,
Sure.
because they had Hades. Right? So Judaism doesn't have this idea of a fire and brimstone kind of a hell. There is a talk about burning in Gehinnom, and I think I've mentioned this other shows. That's a trash dump in the outskirts of Jerusalem, and it's still there. Yeah, it's a trash dump, and you burn trash. Right, so the idea is, you don't want to go there when you die. You don't want your body thrown in the trash. You want people to have a little bit of respect and make sure that your body is properly disposed of, properly interred. And, that's the goal, and the desire is to go back into the cycle. Jewish funerals are very simple. We're not supposed to be embalmed. We're not supposed to be buried in metal. Not hermetically sealed. The idea is to go back into the environment and let your molecules feed everything. So what is salvation? Salvation, I would say, is helping you relieve that pressure of a sense of guilt. And Judaism says that's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not you go to Yom Kippur services and bing, somebody waves a wand on you and now you're clean. The idea is that if you're going to go to Yom Kippur services, you have done the work to get there. And what does that work mean? Well, I tell my congregation there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is you are forgiven and the guilt is lifted for anything for which you are truly repentant and have done restitution. The bad news is that you have to own it, be repentant and do the restitution. Right? So, but if you do that, then you will work through the guilt and you will move forward and let go and let God. And wow, it's hard to believe, but we're coming to the close of this.
It's
Isn't that?
unbelievable how fast it's gone. Yeah.
Right. And so, we talk about heavens, Shemayim, but it's kind of a nebulous term. It's not a highly defined kind of thing. And it comes more from the creation story of God separates the waters, right? The waters from below and the waters above. Shemayim is the word for heaven, that which is water. So it's kind of an interesting... there's a message inside even the Hebrew. So
there is an afterlife.
It's nebulous. The soul is eternal, we say. But exactly what that means, we don't have any specific creeds to say that you have to believe it's this or that. So there's many different views inside Judaism as to how that really happens. What we say is that the soul returns to the source. Well, that's, again, very nebulous. Even the words of be holy are nebulous. Right? All of this is Jell-O pinned to the Velcro on the wall. Right? And Jell-O doesn't stick to Velcro very well. So that's why I say that Judaism is about seeking God. Right? It's about, being in that place where you can understand and sense what's going on in the world rather than any particular thing. And thank you. I'm trying to I'm going to find a way to have seconds so I really know how much time we have. And it's one of the joys in radios. How do you hit that magic moment where you're hitting right at the end? So I've hoped that we've kind of covered some of that, and I hope that answered your question, Neil. It's not one thing, or it's not the Zoroastrian idea that if you don't behave, you're going to fall off into the abyss. That's not a Jewish concept. The idea in Judaism is that God is always there. We're the ones who turn away, and when we turn back, right, when we turn that leaf back over, God's there saying, "Yeah, thank you." Right. So if you look at the prodigal son story, and maybe we'll start with that one of these times. But the prodigal son, the older son never leaves, right? The prodigal son is the one who leaves and comes back, but the one who stays with the father. That's a story about Judaism staying. We've never left. And so there's not an alienation. So as my mentor used to say, if you hit the save button on the computer, you're saved.
Well, that's a perfect way. All right. Tell us where you are located.
Okay, Congregation Eitz Chayim is at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. Friday night services at 7:30. Stolen Moments 9:30. Services 10:30 a.m. on Saturdays.
And thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
You can ask the Rabbi every Friday right here on WPSL. Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast. Don't forget, WPSL on Google Home, Alexa, and Echo. Yeah, and 199,000 of you folks have joined us in the last few weeks from 66 countries. Hey, welcome aboard to True International Talk here when you ask the Rabbi. This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Time right now is 12 noon.